The morning sunlight slanted through the half-open blinds, painting stripes across the faded carpet. I sat at the edge of the couch, staring at the coffee table, my hands wrapped tightly around a mug of lukewarm tea. My daughter's laughter drifted from the kitchen, bright and careless, completely unaware of the storm brewing in our home. But I always knew, it had started small, the little digs, the snide remarks. At first I brushed them off, telling myself that patience was a virtue, that families should endure each other's flaws. But over the months, the tension had grown into something corrosive. Every time my son-in-law Mark spoke, it felt like a blade sliding closer to my throat. His voice, once perhaps charming in another context, had become sharp, biting, demanding. And I had tired of bending, of pretending to be small just to keep the peace. That morning, the final crack came without warning. I had been cleaning the kitchen, straightening dishes, wiping counters I didn't even use. Mark burst through the doorway, red, faced and towering, a scowl etched so deeply it seemed permanent. "Mom," he barked, his voice echoing off the walls, "pay the rent or get out." For a moment the world froze. The tea slipped from my fingers and splashed onto the floor. I stared at him, disbelief pinching my chest. Pay the rent. I had been living here for over a decade. I had watched my daughter grow up in this house. I had put in the work, the sweat, the love, and now he dared to treat me like a tenant. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling but rising steadily. "Did you just," I said, "pay the rent?" He slammed his hand on the counter, rattling the dishes. "I don't care if you've been living here forever. Rules are rules." The audacity. The sheer gall of it. My chest tightened, and a strange mixture of fury and heartbreak flooded me. I wanted to shout, to argue, to make him see the years of life I had poured into this home. But a voice inside me, calm, icy, and deliberate, stopped me. I turned and walked toward the door. Each step felt heavy, but also liberating. I didn't need his permission. I didn't need his approval. I had stayed silent for too long, tolerated his arrogance, swallowed my pride for the sake of peace. But not anymore. As I grabbed my coat, I saw my daughter peeking from the stairs, confusion and worry in her eyes. "Mom, wait, no," I said softly, almost to myself. "It's time." I left the house that morning, not in defeat, but with a plan forming in the quiet of my mind. They thought they had power over me. They thought this house, this sanctuary I had nurtured, belonged to them now. They were wrong, so very wrong, and as I walked down the street, the winter wind biting at my cheeks, I realized something incredible. For the first time in years, I felt free. The anger that had simmered inside me, the hurt that had been hidden behind smiles and nods, was now a weapon. They had pushed me to the breaking point, but breaking points are not ends, they are beginnings, and mine had just begun. After that morning, the world felt different. Every familiar street, every neighborly smile seemed tinted with possibility. I wasn't just a guest in my own life anymore. I was the one holding all the cards, and I intended to play them carefully, with precision. I spent the first few days in quiet reflection, walking through the neighborhood as if seeing it for the first time. Memories of my daughter's childhood, birthdays celebrated in this very house, and the countless nights I'd stayed awake worrying about her future flooded back. Each memory strengthened my resolve. Mark had tried to belittle me, to reduce me to someone powerless. But he had underestimated one crucial thing. I had patience, strategy, and an unshakable sense of justice. I made a list that night, sitting at my small apartment table, the pen scratching against paper like a heartbeat. First, confirm my legal ownership. I had lived here rent, free for years, yes, but the house was mine. Every document, every deed, every tax record clearly listed me as the owner. My name, my money, my home. Mark's demands had been empty threats. The next step required subtlety. I couldn't confront him directly. That would be too obvious, too satisfying for his ego. No, I had to strike where it would hurt the most, where he thought he was untouchable. He believed the house, my generosity, and my silence were his to command. I would prove him wrong. I contacted a lawyer I trusted, someone discreet, professional, and fiercely competent. Over coffee, in a small, quiet cafe, I laid out the plan. I want to sell it. I said plainly, they can't know until the deal is done, and I want the best price, everything they think they own, gone. The lawyer's eyes widened slightly. You understand this is completely legal, right? The house is yours. They have no claim. I smiled, a cold, satisfying curve of the lips. They think they do. That's the fun part. The next weeks were a blur of clandestine meetings, phone calls, and whispered negotiations. I met with buyers, evaluated offers, and signed documents, always careful to stay invisible. Every phone call I received from Mark went unanswered. Every time my daughter called, I gently deflected, careful not to raise suspicion. At night, alone in my apartment, I allowed myself a private smile. Every dollar of that house's value, every bit of equity, would soon be mine. And Mark would discover the truth at the exact moment it would hurt him the most. The memory of that morning, the rage in his eyes, the venom in his voice fueled me. He had demanded rent from the woman who had built his home, who had made sacrifices he would never understand. He had believed he could intimidate me into submission. Now I was the one in control, and the thought made my chest tighten with a thrilling, almost guilty joy. Finally, the deal was set. $900,000, cash, immediate transfer, legally binding and absolutely secret. I kept the documents locked in a safety deposit box. Every signature a quiet victory. Every notarized page a declaration that I would no longer be invisible. As I sat back in my chair that evening, the city lights spilling through my window, I allowed myself a long, slow breath. They were packing their lives into boxes as if this home had always been theirs. But the truth, the beautiful, ironic truth, was that everything they thought they owned had already slipped through their fingers, and when the moment came, when panic set in, and Mark finally realized the magnitude of his mistake, I would be ready. Calm, unmoved, victorious. For the first time in years, I felt the intoxicating power of being completely untouchable. And it was glorious. The morning started like any other for Mark and my daughter, boxes stacked high in the living room, furniture disassembled, the hum of frantic activity filling the air. They had no idea that the foundation of their panic, their sense of security, was about to crumble. Mark was pacing the hallway, muttering under his breath about deadlines, moving trucks, and the outrage of the situation. My daughter flitted from room to room, trying to calm him, to make him see reason, to keep the family from falling apart. But Mark's anger was like a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. Then came the call. My phone vibrated gently on the kitchen counter, displaying Mark's name. I had ignored his calls for weeks, letting him stew in his ignorance, but now he was desperate. I answered with my usual calm, as if I had just been sipping tea on a quiet afternoon, unaware of any chaos. Mom, his voice cracked in a way I had never heard before, panicked, raw, desperate. We can't stay here. I mean, we need help. Please, you have to. I held up a finger, stopping him mid. Rant, Mark, let me stop you right there. There was a pause, filled with the sound of his shallow breaths. What do you mean? He finally whispered. I sold the house. I said simply. The line went silent. You what? His voice was a strangled combination of disbelief and fury. It's true, I continued, calm as a winter morning. I sold it last week. The sale is finalized. $900,000. The house you thought you owned isn't yours anymore. I could hear his knees buckle, his anger giving way to panic, then to utter incomprehension. But how? Mom, I don't understand. You don't need to understand. I said softly. I own the house, Mark. I've always owned the house. You never did. And now, I let a long pause stretch between us, letting the truth settle like a stone in his chest. And now it's gone. On the other end, I could hear him breathing heavily, a sound of someone confronting reality for the first time in a lifetime. He had prided himself on control, on dominance, on making others feel small. And now he had nothing. My daughter, who had been standing beside him, silent and uncertain, finally spoke. "Mom, I didn't know." Her voice was trembling, but there was a hint of admiration, of relief, perhaps even of pride. I smiled, though it was gentle, not cruel. "You don't need to apologize for him. He made his choices, and I made mine. This house these years, I won't let anyone take them from me again." Mark's voice cracked again. We have to move. Now, what do we do?" "You do what anyone does when they've lost everything they thought they owned," I said. "You leave, you pack, you figure it out on your own." The silence on the line was deafening. I could almost hear his mind racing, spinning with anger, shame, and helplessness. For the first time, he realized he had underestimated me, that his arrogance had blinded him to the truth. I hung up, leaving him to stare at the walls that were no longer his, the memories he thought he could claim now stripped of ownership. And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of calm, of justice, of quiet triumph. They had tried to push me out, to demand from me, to belittle me, and it had backfired spectacularly. The storm of betrayal, frustration, and anger had finally cleared, leaving only one thing in its wake: power reclaimed, dignity restored, and a lesson painfully learned by the one who had thought himself untouchable. And as I looked out my window, the city alive with possibility, I knew that the sweetest victories are the ones that are quietly, cleverly, irrevocably earned. The house was quiet now. The moving trucks had come and gone, taking with them the clutter, the boxes, the illusions of ownership that Mark had clung to so desperately. I watched from my small apartment across town as they loaded the last of their belongings, his face pale, defeated, his hands trembling as if the weight of his arrogance had finally caught up to him. It was a sight both bittersweet and satisfying. I felt no joy in their pain, only a deep, profound sense of justice. For years I had been silenced, dismissed, and taken for granted. I had smiled through the insults, laughed at the condescension, and endured the passive-aggressive slights, but no more. The $900,000 was now safely in my account, a symbol of everything I had endured and every sacrifice I had made. I didn't need the money to punish Mark. It was never about that. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my sense of self-worth. But I would be lying if I said the sight of him, realizing he had lost everything he thought he controlled, didn't bring a quiet, delicious thrill. I spent that evening reflecting on the years of my life spent bending to accommodate others, hiding my own dreams behind the smiles of family harmony, swallowing resentment to avoid confrontation. I had given too much, expected too little, and yet somehow I had endured. But now I had the power to chart my own course. My daughter visited that evening, sitting across from me with a cup of tea in hand. She was quiet at first, unsure how to approach the complicated mix of gratitude, guilt, and admiration that swirled inside her. "Mom," she said finally, her voice soft, almost reverent, I didn't understand what you've done for us, for me, all these years. You always let things slide, and I thought it was I don't know just how you are, but now I see. You were protecting us, protecting me, and yourself." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I wasn't just protecting you, sweetheart. I was protecting me too, and I finally realized that it's never wrong to stand up for yourself, to take what is yours and to demand respect. Sometimes justice has to be quietly earned." Tears welled in her eyes, and she squeezed my hand. "You're incredible," she whispered. I smiled, a warmth spreading through my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Incredible, yes, but more than that, I felt whole. Free, untouchable. In the weeks that followed, I used the money wisely, not extravagantly, but in ways that nurtured my independence and security. I invested, traveled, and even took art classes I had long postponed. The world was suddenly wide and open, a playground of possibilities I had denied myself for far too long. And Mark, he was a shadow in the past, a lesson in arrogance, entitlement, and the danger of underestimating the quiet ones. I never reached out to gloat. The truth of his loss was punishment enough. Each time I thought of him, it was not with malice, but with a calm satisfaction, a knowing smile that only someone who has endured and prevailed can truly understand. I had walked away that morning with a simple resolve. They could not dictate my life, my choices, or my happiness. And in the end, I had emerged victorious not by force, not by confrontation, but by strategy, patience, and the quiet confidence of someone who knew their worth. The house that once symbolized frustration and disrespect had become a symbol of my triumph, a testament to the fact that power, dignity, and justice often come quietly, invisibly, and yet irrevocably. I sat back in my chair, the city lights twinkling outside my window, and let out a slow, contented sigh. Life had handed me a bitter moment, and I had turned it into a sweet, irrevocable victory. And in that quiet evening I knew something essential. The best revenge is not cruelty. It is reclaiming your life, your peace, and the respect that has always been yours. The storm had passed, the chaos settled, and I, at last, was free.